You either love him or hate him, or if you haven't heard of him, when you do, you'll either love him or hate him.
You've done some great work, and in some ways I love you. In other ways, you're stupid and arrogant.
There's really no in-between with Dave Ramsey. Between his insults and his snark and his abrasiveness, most people are just dismissive of him and miss that he helps millions and millions of people change their money story.
It's your fault. You work your butt off your whole life, and you have nothing to show for it. Nothing.
So if you've dismissed him, I'm going to take this chance. I'm going to take a risk. I'm going to encourage you to take another look, a more honest look at Dave Ramsey and the basics that he has that can help you remake your money story. Hello, I'm James Callahan, and this is The Do-Over Show. And if you're in the midst of a money story do-over, I can almost guarantee that in your YouTube feed or on social media, yeah, Dave Ramsey's been in your face. Dave Ramsey and all of his insults have stung you, have turned you off to some really basic advice that makes people irate, and yet somehow works for a whole lot of people.
So, all right, here we go, guys. It's Whitney and George. House and everything! $165,000 paid off in 26 months, and Olive. Count it down. Let's hear a debt-free scream.
3, 2, 1.
We're debt-free! Yeah!
His baby steps are haunting you, mocking you, following you. You go to sleep at night worrying about money, and all you see is his scowling face looking at you. Not a nice way to go to sleep.
This is just stupid. It's stupid on steroids.
His snark is just too much for people, but once you've had your butt kicked, that last time, the time that really hurt, and you're finally ready to try something that, well, is uncomfortable, then Dave Ramsey's there waiting for you. And he actually has some very basic ideas that can get you started.
We're fat and we're broke because we have no ability to do critical thought, and we don't stop and look at what we're putting into our lives. This is nuts. It's nuts. It's completely out of control.
And Dave Ramsey, he might just be the savior you've been praying for.
It's absurd.
So let's take a quick look at Dave Ramsey's basic, his baby steps, and what they're really about, and how we can start to, well, learn from them in ways that may get us beyond just his abrasiveness. First, a confession. In the midst of horrible financial decisions, outspending my income because I thought I was entitled to more and better things, even though I wasn't making the money, and in the housing downturn of the 2000s, well, me and my family, we pretty much lost everything. And we found ourselves sitting in a church basement with a bunch of other people in a similar circumstance, taking Dave Ramsey's Financial Peace University course. Now, of all the how-tos and how-not-tos that we covered in that course, one thing became really clear to me, and that is my problems were a combination of impatience and ignorance. Yeah, probably some insecurity thrown in too. Everyone around us in that church basement room in that course, they were just like us. A lot of them older, some even younger. And there were people there from professions. There were lawyers there, people in the finance business, banking, insurance. They weren't just people who didn't know about money. They're people who had enough money and learned how to outspend their money. People who are supposed to be smart enough to be able to handle their money. Yep, that's where the ignorance comes in. Because it really isn't just about, do I have enough money? It's really about, how is my brain wired when it comes to my money story? So if you're one of the people that dismisses Dave Ramsey as not for you, just doesn't fit your profile, well, it's probably because you haven't been broken yet, or broken enough to realize that a lot of what he's saying, it's not unique to Dave Ramsey. Yeah, he has a couple quirks. We'll talk about those. But most of it is about getting over ourselves, not getting over Dave Ramsey.
Now, I was aware of who you were. I listened to the radio station occasionally. I read the books, but nothing really stuck.
Well, it's the nature of what you do.
Yes.
Your brain's wired that way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So before we get into the 1, 2, 3s, 4, 5, 6s, and 7s of his 7 baby steps, let's talk about his big idea, and that is credit is crack. or meth or whatever your bad destructive addiction is. Credit, that's the problem.
This is your brain. This is drugs. This is your brain on drugs. Any questions?
Credit literally rewires our brains. I remember when all of my kids started to receive, when they turned 18 years of age, when they had no or little income, they started receiving offers to have credit cards. Why? It was like a drug dealer giving them a sample, because what happens when we use credit, it stimulates the reward center in our brain. Neurologists say that it releases dopamine, and that dopamine starts to rewire and connect things in our brain that gives us feelings, good feelings, that only happen when we use credit. Now, in turn, when we buy things with cash, it barely stimulates that same reward center. The dopamine just sort of sits there. The only time we get a little bit of uptick in the pleasure from buying something with cash is when it's really cheap and we think we're getting a deal or getting away with something or paying less than that other person did, so we feel like we're making out ahead. And every study that's been done tells us that when we have a chance to use credit as opposed to cash, we will always buy more, spend more, and more of things, and buy a better version of the thing that we're looking for. And you know what that is? That means that we're messed up. Our brains are messed up because we've wired them that way. And big credit has taken advantage of that. And that is not Dave Ramsey's fault. That's not why we should blame him. That one's on us. That one's on us because we believed the lie that somehow credit gave us access to things that we then thought we were entitled to because we deserved them, rather than the things that we might actually be able to afford.
All of the millionaires that we interview, unless they inherited the money, which is very, very few of them, less than 10% of them inherited the money, did it by saving and investing their income.
I knew this stuff. When I was a kid, I was sitting in a classroom, 5th or 6th grade, hearing this money lecture from some old codger. And he said, here's a 50-51 rule. And he wrote it up on the blackboard. Yeah, chalkboard. It was that long ago. Wrote it up on the chalkboard and said, if you make 50 / you don't get to spend 51. Live by the 50-51 rule. Okay, I've known that since I was 8, 9, 10 years of age. It doesn't automatically happen though, does it? Okay, so Dave says we want to get over credit and our dependence on credit and our obsession with a credit score. Everybody's obsessed with that. You can pay a service, bump your credit score 10, 20, 30, 40 points, and you can get lower insurance rates and access to lower financing. Financing, credit again. Yes, it's a cycle of debt. And Dave says if you learn to live differently, you don't need it. That's what keeps most of us from liking Dave Ramsey. He says you don't need a good credit score if you live and you pay with cash. And Dave has hundreds of stories and thousands of testimonials from people who are debt-free, and they celebrate it.
Portia, Christian, and DJ, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, $173,000 paid off. Cash flowed another 30, did it in 23 months. They sold everything in sight. They are free. $145,000 up to $165,000 income. Count it down. Let's hear a debt-free scream.
1, 2, ready, sing. We are debt-free. Debt-free!
What it's really about is behavioral modification, and it's very much like a recovery program.
Right, we just won't drink so much.
No, not so. Look, I got a plan, and we got to do it, honey. We got to make it work. We're going to get sober, but we're going to stay sober. We don't take a drop. Nothing.
It means forswearing it completely, 100%. You don't just take a little bit of it, you avoid it completely. That kind of absolute behavioral modification, that's where Dave Ramsey is coming from. So instead of a 12-step program, Dave has his seven baby steps. So let's take a quick look at what they are about and how they really start to mess with our brains. Number 1 is save $1,000 as a starter emergency fund. Well, what's the big deal with that? Put $1,000 in the bank and don't touch it. Well, this one keeps us from going deeper and deeper into debt or using credit, and it's really that simple. It gives us some room to breathe, so when something breaks or we have an emergency, then at least we don't have to dip into a credit account and start to use credit as our safety net. We start to become those who put the cash aside, and we build our own safety net as an alternative to a credit safety net. And that's all that it's meant to do. The money just sits there. It's not invested. It's not earning interest. It just sits there. And for most of us, this is a brand new thing. Money just there, not spent, not having to be spent, not able to be spent. You just park it there. And that is a brand new experience for, I bet, a lot of us. His second baby step is to pay off all debt. There, that's easy. He has some steps, some ways of doing it. Snowballing, you're paying off the lower amounts and working to the higher ones, and how to defer creditors and how to talk them into accepting less than they're after. Yes, it's all there and you can look at it yourself. But what's really at the heart of paying off this debt is beginning to wean ourselves from a dependence, the way our brains work, our dependence on what it feels like to have that. So let's say you pay off a credit card and you have a $2,000 limit on it and you bring it down to zero. Your brain's going to start to tell you that you have $2,000 to spend. And that's where Dave says you cut your credit card in half and you stop using it. There was one woman in our Financial Peace University setting in that church basement that every time she came to class, she took out a credit card. She put it down on the table in front of her. And the entire time for all of our class meetings, when we sat there, she sat at that card and just stared at it. Other people would take their cards up in front. They had this big pair of scissors and they'd cut their cards in half and everybody would clap. Oh, awesome, fantastic, way to go, you're the man. This woman never got to that point. You see, there's just something about it, having it. It gives us a sense of security it's not something that's just there. We create it, or it's created by buying into what big credit is telling us. The third baby step is saving 3 to 6 months of our total living expenses. Gross, what do you live on in a month? Times that by 3, times that by 6, that's your next goal. Really simple, right? Yeah, it means creating some runway. It gives us, well, that peace. That's why it's called financial peace. But it gives us a sense that even if something does go wrong, and things do go wrong once in a while, that we don't have to panic and we won't be on the street, that we'll actually be able to create some space and find a way to replace that income. Again, it's about rewiring how we think about money, but it also gives us a sense that there's money there that we are in control of, and it's not subject to the use or abuse of others. It's just there. By the way, it's not invested, it's not leveraged, it's not borrowed against. It just sits there doing nothing except making us feel better. The fourth baby step is to invest 15% of your income. Now, obviously, if you invest early, the younger you are, regular investing over that time, eighth wonder of the world, compound interest, fantastic. If you're older or really old, like people were, some of those people in the class, well, then you have to be super aggressive in setting apart a larger portion of your income, which means living on less. And the advice is to set aside 40, even 50% or more of our total income as an investment to set aside for retirement, to set aside to build that initial wealth that we need. Now, that means that most of us are just not going to be able to do it. Sometimes you will add a second job, drive Uber, have a gig job, do something on the side, become a famous YouTuber. Whatever it is, you do that in addition to the job and you put all of that money away. So I started doing that. I was an adjunct instructor. I had a full-time job, also worked as an adjunct instructor in a couple colleges. And instead of spending that money like, hey, I have extra cash, all that money went into investments. And I just put it aside and I left it there. And every year since then, after I teach as an adjunct and I get my checks, it goes right into those investment accounts. And that's really what it's about, learning to change the way we approach money. Dave Ramsey has this saying that if you live like no one else, you'll be able to live like no one else. And there are like 10 different versions of it, but you get it. That's sort of radical living on less, not just 50-51, but living on less or half or at least a third of less than what you live on now. That kind of discipline that it takes to set aside some investments that you then get to see work over time. That's really what he's after. And by the way, no one else in the YouTube financial space, no one else is saying anything radically different. Everybody famous tells us the same thing, and that is you make money in order to have money, to invest money, and the longer you can do it, the more upside you'll have. His 6th baby step is to pay off your house. For him, the goal is that when you retire, your house is paid off. So you're not paying that, you're just paying property tax if you live in a state that pays property tax and your homeowner's insurance. But the goal is to have it paid off so that you're not in debt, you don't have to worry about your credit score. And this, for most people, is the old American dream, that is to own a house and then own a house. Most of us don't own a house. When we say we own a house, we have a mortgage, and that's what we have, and we live in a house that someone else owns. Dave wants to get you out of that. Why would he want to get you out of that? Because again, it's about changing our money story and the way our brains experience money. And his 7th baby step is to become obscenely rich and learn to give away things without strings attached. We stink at that. We don't give gifts, we exchange gifts. We expect things in return. Well, getting to the point where you can just give stuff away, your stuff, and feel good about it, that's supposed to trip that reward center. And it does. Giving actually feels good. When you give your money to a nonprofit, there's a part of your brain that starts to click in, that same dopamine release in that reward center in the brain that says, that feels good. It feels good to give your money to something good. But doing it without strings attached, that takes money maturity, where you're not trying to manipulate others or buy favor or buy their love or buy their affection or buy their attention. And instead, you're willing to give it away because you trust them. And you're giving your money away to show who you are. And that's why charitable giving is so successful in voluntary societies, like this one. It gives us a chance to be better selves. So why do so many people hate Dave Ramsey? Besides his personality, the heart of it is when he says these things about money and he gets into our brains, that's what makes us uncomfortable, because we feel like, I'm entitled to live a different way, or I make enough money, I should be able to enjoy good things, or the things that other people enjoy, that kind of aspirational living. And we really exchange our own peace and well-being for our affection or winning acceptance in another crowd, in other people's eyes, where we buy crap and we expect people to like us or look up to us because we own certain things. So if we don't like Dave Ramsey, that's probably at the heart of it. I am not a professional psychologist. I do have a Ph.D., but not in psychology. I once had a chance to get it. You imagine me as a clinical psychologist? Yeah, it wouldn't have worked out very well. So at the heart of it is, this is about rewiring our brains. Taking those small incremental steps that get us out of the stuckness. Is stuckness a word? It should be. The stuckness that we experience when it comes to money and how our brains work and how we think about money and what we're entitled to and what we deserve. So this is very much like James Clear's Atomic Habits, the idea of making a 1% change every day and keeping up that consistently. Those incremental changes have exponential upside. I've done a video about an experiment I did with this, saving $10 a day every single day to reach a $1,000 goal in 100 days. Yes, it was successful, and I learned a bunch from it, and I bet you can too. I've done a video right here. Check it out. And in the meantime, as you work through your anger issues with Dave Ramsey, you know you've got him, I'm encouraging you to do something. Start something today. Do something different today with your money. Whether it's saving or putting things aside or even not doing something with your money. That is, not buying something and instead taking that money and putting it to use for your advantage. Whatever it is, start something today. Remember that old proverb, when's the best time to plant a tree? 20 years ago. When's the second best time? Today. Pick something today and start it. You don't have to be a follower of Dave Ramsey and worship at his altar, but you really should get a hold of your money story, especially if you want to make a do-over in your life and you want to get a handle on your money. And thanks for being part of the Do-Over Show. Please, could you tap the like button, whether you like Dave Ramsey or not? And while you're down there, would you subscribe and ring the notifications bell so you don't miss the next episode? I'm so glad you found me and I found you. Thanks.
Let's hear a debt-free scream.
3, 2, 1.
We